I'm David, the sheriff of a small town where everyone seems to know everyone else. After 19 years of marriage to Cindy and our daughter Sophia, I thought my life was the perfect family picture. Perfect, stable, happy, and full of meaning. But it turns out the little cracks in that picture started with someone I didn't expect. The morning began as a warm ray of light in the cold months of our cooling marriage. Cindy and I had just had a moment of intimacy, a rare occurrence in the past year. I lay next to her, feeling the steady breathing of the woman I'd loved for 19 years. Cindy had always been the center of our family, the wonderful mother to Sophia, and the wife I thought would be by my side forever. But that morning, her eyes were different, as if some secret was eating her from the inside. David, I need to tell you something, she began, her voice shaking as she tried to contain her fear. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. As a cop, I was used to handling stressful situations, but I never thought I would need that skill when dealing with the woman I loved. Cindy continued, her eyes distant. James is back, she admitted. I wasn't surprised. I'd known this from my quiet investigations, but her next words were like a knife to my heart. I still love him, but I love you too, she said, forcing a weak smile, as if hoping this confession wouldn't hurt me. I thought maybe we could split my time. 1 week with you and 1 week with him. Time seemed to stand still. I don't know how long I was silent, but in my mind, the memories of 19 years of marriage flashed by like a fast forward movie. From the day I proposed to Cindy, the day Sophia was born, to the simple family meals. Everything was now covered by the mist of betrayal, but I refused to let myself collapse. I am David, a man who has always stood firm against all odds, and this time was no exception. I understand, I said, my voice so cold that it surprised me. Cindy looked at me in surprise, as if she expected rage or at least vehement disapproval. But I decided in that moment, I would not let her run my life. I agreed to her plan, not because I approved of it, but because I needed time to figure out how to turn things around. When Cindy left the room to go to work, I lay on my bed, my eyes glued to the ceiling, but my mind racing like a raging storm. It wasn't just her suggestion, it was the way she said it, softly but selfishly, as if I should find it reasonable, as if this was a fair decision. I got out of bed, wondering how I could keep my cool in front of Cindy, but that was something I'd learned over my years as a sheriff. Self-control was my most powerful weapon. If I let my emotions show, she would see my vulnerability and take control. No, I couldn't let that happen. I made a strong cup of coffee and stood looking out the kitchen window at the early morning sunlight shining on the lawn. A plan began to form in my mind. I wasn't just going to accept sharing Cindy, as she suggested. I was going to use it as a weapon to bring things back under my control. I decided that the truth about Cindy and I, about our relationship, would no longer be something she could decide for herself. I would let her think she was in control, that I was on board with the plan, but inside I would quietly take steps to protect myself and prepare for the day when everything would change completely. My work in the police force has taught me that there is nothing more dangerous than staying calm in a crisis. When faced with a criminal, the last thing you can do is lose control. This time, Cindy was the criminal, and I would treat her as such, not with force, but with careful calculation. That morning, as I drove to the police station, the shock was still there, but I didn't let it overwhelm me. I greeted my colleagues with a small smile, trying to act as normal as possible. But inside, I was preparing for the biggest battle of my life, a battle for control, for honor, and perhaps even, in some small way, for revenge. The plan started with me needing to know more about my rival, James. I used the resources available to investigate him. James, who was Cindy's fiancé before I came along, had now become the biggest threat to my life. I discovered that he had returned to town after the death of his wealthy wife, a woman who had supported and nurtured him for the past decade. What's more interesting is that he's not just back to find Cindy, he's trying to get back the life he abandoned. He's a smart guy, I don't deny that, but I've dealt with people who are more sophisticated than him in my career, and I know how to bring them out. For the first few weeks, I went along with Cindy's plan. I didn't question or react. Instead, I observed. Cindy thought I was going along with this arrangement because I loved her too much to let her go. But in reality, I had begun to see her in a different light. Not as the woman I loved, but as a player in a game in which I was the dominant force. That evening, when Cindy returned from James' week, I sat in the living room, pretending to read the paper. She walked in with a small smile on her face, but there was a hint of tension in her eyes. I guessed that, deep down, Cindy felt uneasy about the whole situation too. "How was your week?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Great," I replied, without looking up. "How about you? Is James taking good care of you?" She paused for a second before answering, and in that moment, I saw the uncertainty in her eyes. "Yeah, it's fine," she replied, quickly changing the subject. Looking back, I realized that the early years of my marriage to Cindy were the happiest. Cindy and I met when I was just starting my job as sheriff in this small town. At the time, I wasn't the most remarkable man, just a regular guy with a responsible job and a heart searching for a place to belong. But Cindy, with her gentle smile and deep eyes, changed everything. Cindy is not the type of woman you see on the cover of a magazine. She's not flashy, but her gentleness and sincerity are something that anyone would love. She told me about her life before, about her ex, James. According to Cindy, James was her first love, but he left her for a richer woman, someone who could give him everything she did not have. Cindy told the story not with bitterness, but with deep sadness, as if it were an old wound that she had learned to live with. It was Cindy's honesty that made me love her even more. I didn't care about her past. I loved Cindy for who she was now, the strong, kind, and charismatic woman. After a year of dating, I proposed to Cindy, and we entered into marriage believing that our love would overcome all obstacles. One of the most beautiful moments of our marriage was the birth of our first daughter, Sophia. Sophia was the fruit of our love, the light of our lives. Cindy became a wonderful mother. She always gave her all her love, care, and time. Meanwhile, I tried to be a good father, someone Sophia could be proud of. Raising Sophia was not always easy, but it brought our family closer together. Cindy and I are more than just husband and wife. We are best friends. We share our joys and sorrows. Family dinners, fun-filled trips, and even arguments over who does the dishes. They all form a beautiful part of our marriage. But as time went on, things started to change. I can't remember exactly when it started. Maybe it was when Sophia grew up, left our arms, and started living her own life. Maybe it was when we no longer had common responsibilities to connect, and Cindy gradually became distant. Or maybe it was because I myself changed, no longer the man who knew how to light the fire in this relationship like before. But no matter how things changed, I always thought we were strong enough to overcome any challenge. I loved Cindy, and I always believed she loved me back. But that belief began to waver the day James, the man from her past, came back to town. James returned to town on an early fall day, when the leaves were beginning to fall. I first heard about his presence from Cindy. It was an ordinary evening, when they were sitting in the living room. Cindy mentioned James lightly, as if she were talking about an old friend she had run into. "James is back," she said, trying to keep her voice casual, but I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. At first, I didn't think much of it. James might be part of Cindy's past, but I believed that the past was the past. However, the changes in Cindy that followed made me worry. She became quieter, more pensive, and often left the house without notice. When I asked her questions, she would only respond with vague answers. "I'm going to see some friends," or "I need some time alone." My first suspicions were confirmed at a barbecue our family was hosting. When I walked out onto the porch to find Cindy, I found her sitting with James. They were talking more intimately than I expected. As I approached, Cindy blushed, which I knew was a sign of insecurity. She only blushed when she was feeling guilty or hiding something. That night when I got home, I tried to keep my voice as calm as possible when I asked Cindy about James. She admitted that he had been an important part of her life, but quickly assured me that there was nothing between them but old memories. "He was just a friend," she said, but the tension in her words gave me a different feeling. Gradually, James's presence became a big shadow in our marriage. Cindy no longer spent as much time at home as before, and even when she was home, She often fell into a state of absent-mindedness. The feeling that I was losing Cindy became more and more obvious. I'm not naive. Throughout my career as a cop, I've learned to read people through their smallest actions. Cindy may think I don't see it, but I know she's hiding something. Part of me wants to confront Cindy and demand the truth, but the other part of me hesitates. I'm afraid of what I might hear. Instead, I turned to what I knew best: investigating. I began to gather information about James through my connections in the police department. He had returned to town after the death of his wealthy wife, who had helped him rise in his career. After she died of cancer, James had little left to keep him in the big city, and he chose to return to this place, the place where he had it all, including Cindy. The more I learned, the more I realized that James not only wanted to return to town, but he wanted to restore what he had lost, including Cindy. Instead of anger, I felt a surge of determination. If James thought he could walk into my life and take away everything I had built, he was wrong. Cindy may not realize it, but I'm prepared for anything. I don't know where this story will take us, but one thing I'm sure of: I won't let anyone take my family away from me without a fight. I never thought that one day Cindy would stand before me and make a proposal that just hearing it was enough to make me feel like my entire world was collapsing. It was a normal morning, starting with the gentle sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. After a long period of indifference, Cindy suddenly took the initiative to approach me. That rare intimacy gave me a little hope that maybe things were slowly going back to normal. But I was wrong. After we shared a rare moment of intimacy, Cindy leaned against my shoulder, her eyes looking far away as if she was trying to muster the courage to say something. "David," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." I turned around, looking straight into her brown eyes. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the strange unease that was starting to creep up inside me. Cindy hesitated, as if weighing her words. Finally, she said, "James, he still loves me, and I love him too. But I love you too, David. I don't want to lose anyone." For a few seconds, I was speechless. Cindy's words were like a punch to the chest, making me choke. But the worst was yet to come. She continued, "I thought maybe we could share. 1 week with you, 1 week with him." Horror filled me, but I didn't let it show. Cindy was watching my reaction, as if hoping I would see this as a reasonable thing to do, a way to maintain her love for both of us. In that moment, I realized that this was not only a betrayal, but the ultimate selfishness. I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions. "You mean you want to split your time between me and James?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Cindy nodded, her eyes hopeful, as if she thought I would agree. "Yes, I believe we can do this. I love you, David, and I don't want to lose this family. But I can't give up on James either." I looked at Cindy for a long time, trying to understand how the woman I'd loved for 19 years could come up with such a ridiculous plan. But instead of letting anger get the better of me, I decided to use this moment to my advantage. "Okay," I said, my voice low but clear. Cindy looked surprised, perhaps expecting a different reaction: anger, hurt, or even outright disapproval. But no, I agreed, knowing that this would give me time to figure things out and plan a counterattack. When Cindy left the room, I sat on the bed, my heart empty, but my mind racing with thoughts. I couldn't believe that the woman I had trusted and loved for nearly 2 decades would make such a request, without any hesitation or consideration for my feelings. Share? Did she really think that love and marriage could be reduced to something like a rental agreement? But instead of letting my anger get the better of me, I forced myself to stay calm. As a sheriff, I had dealt with all sorts of complicated situations, from dangerous criminals to bloody cases. I knew that staying calm was the only way to gain the upper hand. Right now, Cindy was nothing more than a suspect. I needed to investigate, and James was the central figure in the case that was shaking my life. I walked into my office, closed the door, and sat down. This was where I usually found quiet time to think. A framed family photo sat neatly on my desk in front of me. I picked it up and looked at Cindy and Sophia's faces. Their bright smiles in the photo were like a sharp knife stabbing into my heart. Beautiful memories flooded back. The day Sophia was born, family dinners, short vacations filled with laughter. But now those moments were threatened by James's presence and Cindy's vulnerability. I knew that if I let things go the way Cindy suggested, I would lose everything. Our relationship would never be the same. The love I had for her, no matter how deep, would be irreparable. I couldn't let that happen. But how to turn things around without losing control? There was only one answer. I had to play by Cindy's rules, at least for now. Over the next few days, I began to pay attention to every detail around Cindy. I watched how she behaved, the secret calls she made, and the texts she received. I said nothing, asked nothing. I wanted her to think that I was completely okay with her plan, that I loved her too much to object. But inside, I was secretly making my own plans. At the same time, I began to gather information about James. Given my position, it was not difficult to investigate him. I discovered that after his wife died, he had returned to town with nothing. He had no assets, no steady job. He was living off the small amount of money he had earned from the sale of his old house. This leads me to understand that James is not just looking for love from Cindy, he is looking for a chance to rebuild his life. And getting Cindy back, who was his backup plan in the past, is probably the shortest path to achieving that. I felt a simmering anger rising, but instead of acting immediately, I channeled it into planning. If James wanted to come back into Cindy's life, I would show him that it wouldn't be easy to take away what I had built over 19 years. And if Cindy really wanted to test my patience, she would realize that she'd misjudged the husband she thought was safe. The first week of my deal with Cindy, James, and I started out strangely, as if I were living in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Cindy spent the week with James, and our house felt eerily empty. Despite my mental preparation, I couldn't help but wonder where she was, what she was doing, and how she felt about James right now. The first few nights were brutal. I lay in my empty bed, staring at the ceiling, trying not to picture Cindy in someone else's arms. But the thoughts kept coming like a flood, choking me. Instead of letting them break me, I turned the pain into motivation. I reminded myself that I'd agreed to this deal not to concede defeat, but to wait for the right moment to strike back. When Cindy returned early the following week, I tried to keep things casual. She walked into the house with a reserved smile, carrying a strange sense of unease. "Are you okay?" she asked, as if testing my mood. "Very well," I replied, keeping my voice soft but firm. I knew that any sign of weakness would make her think she was in control. Over the next few days, I focused on creating a comfortable and stable space for Cindy when she was with me. I did the things we used to do together: cooking, watching movies, talking about life. Cindy seemed more at ease when she was with me, as if she felt that things were going in the right direction. But I didn't let myself get caught up in that feeling. I realized that even though Cindy was laughing and talking to me, part of her mind was still with James, and that made me more determined than ever. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, I tactfully turned the conversation toward James. "I take it your week with James was good?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Cindy hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Yeah, it's fine," she said, unable to hide the worry in her eyes. "I'm glad you're happy," I replied, giving her a small smile, but inside I was analyzing her every word, her every expression. I realized that Cindy wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. Perhaps the arrangement she thought would be ideal wasn't as simple as she thought. Meanwhile, I not only focused on Cindy, but also began to approach James in a subtle way. I found ways to meet him at social gatherings that I knew Cindy would not attend. At a small gathering at a mutual friend's house, I approached James, pretending to have a friendly conversation. "James, I know you and Cindy have a lot to talk about," I said calmly. "I just hope you do right by her." James, though trying to maintain his composure, couldn't hide his slight confusion. "Of course," he replied, but I could see that my words had planted a little unease in his mind. By the time I left that meeting, I knew I'd begun to shake James's confidence. And I didn't stop there. I began dropping subtle hints that made James question whether Cindy was truly committed to him. The tension between Cindy and James began to show after a few weeks of the deal. Although Cindy tried to keep a straight face when she returned home, the little expressions on her face said it all. She was not as relaxed as she had been at first, and every time I mentioned James, her eyes would avert. This made me realize that, despite getting what I wanted, James was not all Cindy had imagined. One evening, after dinner, Cindy sat on the sofa, staring at the phone in her hand. I walked over and sat down next to her. "What's wrong, Cindy?" I asked, keeping my voice soft but curious. She shook her head, but I could sense the unease. "Nothing, just, I'm a little tired." I said nothing more, just sat there looking at her in silence. A feeling of tension began to settle in the room. I knew Cindy was feeling the pressure, and that only reinforced my plan. The tension continued to escalate when I received a text message from a mutual friend of James's. He said that James had started to get annoyed that Cindy wasn't giving him her full attention during their week together. James, who was used to being in control, seemed to be losing patience with Cindy still being tied to me. This created the perfect opportunity for me. The following week, when Cindy came home, I decided to take the next step in my plan. I did everything I could to make her feel safe and secure around me. From romantic dinners to deep conversations to small gestures of care that I had previously overlooked. I could see Cindy loosening up around me, as if she were searching for something she couldn't get with James. But I didn't stop there. I tactfully asked questions about James, not directly, but in ways that made Cindy think. "I hope James treats you well," I said once as we sat talking. "He seems like a very assertive person. That can be annoying sometimes, right?" Cindy didn't answer right away, but I could see her thinking. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she nodded silently. "James can be a little difficult sometimes," she admitted, as if she were saying something she had been trying to hide. This was exactly what I needed. I didn't rush Cindy into a choice right away, but instead let her feel the differences between us. Meanwhile, I continued to take care of James from afar, sowing doubts and insecurities in him. The climax came one afternoon when Cindy was with James. I got a call from her, her voice strained. "David, I need to talk to you," she said. When we met that evening, Cindy looked tired and stressed. "James, he's starting to change," she said, her voice soft. "He's pressuring me. He wants me to give up everything for you and just be with him." I kept my face calm, but inside I knew this was a sign of trouble. James, in his desperate need to win Cindy, had sabotaged his plans, and I, on the other hand, remained the steady, calm man, just what Cindy was looking for in this time of turmoil. Over the next few weeks, things got more complicated. Cindy began to act confused, as if she were losing control of the game she had created. James became increasingly angry and upset while I continued to play the perfect husband. When I look at Cindy, I no longer see the strong woman I fell in love with. Instead, I see someone torn between two choices, but I know, deep down, that there is only one right path. It all started to become clearer when Cindy returned from her week with James looking tired and sad. Although she tried to act normal, I could tell that the balance she had hoped for between James and me had completely collapsed. Cindy was no longer as cheerful as before. She was quieter, often sitting absent-mindedly looking out the window, her eyes drawn somewhere far away. When I asked her how she was doing, she only responded with vague answers like, "nothing," or "just thinking." But I knew that James was gradually becoming a burden on her mind. One night, while we were having dinner, Cindy suddenly said, "James thinks I should make a decision." I looked up, trying to stay calm despite the turmoil inside me. "What decision, Cindy?" "He wants me to choose," she said, her voice shaking. "James says he can't keep sharing me with you. He wants me to leave everything behind and be with him completely." I put my fork down on the table, feeling a quiet relief rise inside me. James, in his desire to control everything, had finally ruined his own plans. But I didn't show it on my face. Instead, I looked at Cindy with sympathy. "And how do you feel about that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Cindy was silent, as if considering her answer. Finally, she said, "I don't know, David. I don't want to hurt you, but I don't want to lose him either." The confession, painful as it was exactly what I needed to hear. Cindy was torn between two sides, but her indecision was making James impatient. I knew that the longer it took, the bigger the rift between them would become, and that was my advantage. Over the next few weeks, I tried to take every opportunity to escalate the conflict between Cindy and James. I subtly hinted at the stability and security Cindy felt with me. "I just want you to be happy, Cindy," I said, whenever she mentioned James. "Whatever you choose, I will respect your decision. Not only did these words make Cindy feel like I was a reliable option, but they also put invisible pressure on James, who always wanted to control the situation. I began to hear from mutual friends that James was becoming increasingly stressed. He complained about Cindy's inability to make decisions and seemed to want to get back together with me. The climax came one evening when Cindy received a call from James right in front of me. I was reading in the living room when I heard Cindy's strained voice coming from the kitchen. "James, please don't make me choose now," she said, sounding on the verge of tears. I put down my book, walked into the kitchen, and saw Cindy clutching her phone, her face pale. She looked up at me with frightened eyes, as if she was worried I would be angry. But I just quietly walked over, put my hand on her shoulder, and said, "Are you okay?" After the call ended, Cindy sat down on the couch, her head in her hands. "I don't know what to do, David," she said, her voice weary. "James is getting more and more out of control. He said if I don't choose, he'll leave forever." I sat down next to her and said softly, "Maybe it's for the best, Cindy. If James really loves you, he'll respect you and your needs. But if he only cares about what he wants, is he really the one you should be with?" My words seemed to leave a deep impression on Cindy. She said nothing, just nodded slightly. But in her eyes, I could see that something inside her was slowly changing. In the days that followed that tense phone call, I noticed that Cindy was increasingly drawn into the conflict between James and me. She wasn't herself. She was restless, sleepless, and irritable. I knew she was torn between two choices she had made, but now I could also see clearly that James was destroying the relationship himself. I heard more from mutual friends that James was becoming increasingly difficult, expressing jealousy and anger. He was unhappy with Cindy continuing to spend time with me, and had even begun to pressure her into making a final decision. Part of me wanted to end the game right away, but I knew that would be too soon. Instead, I let things continue to play out naturally, letting the conflict between them escalate on its own. One evening, Cindy came home from a meeting with James. Her face was red, and her eyes were puffy as if she had been crying for a long time. She walked into the house, didn't say a word, just put her bag down and plopped down on the couch. I sat across from her, waiting silently. "We had a fight," she sighed, her voice shaking. "James, he said I was using him. He thought I didn't really love him if I was still here with you." I felt a little smoldering satisfaction, but on the surface, I kept my cool. "So, what did you say to him?" "I don't know what to say," Cindy confessed, her voice almost desperate. "I just want you both to know that I love you both, and I don't want to lose either of you." That answer didn't surprise me. Cindy had always tried to keep things balanced, but her selfishness didn't allow her to realize that such a relationship couldn't last. And James, with his desire to control everything, was pushing her away without even realizing it. "I think James is being too hasty," I said, deliberately planting doubts in her mind. "If he really loved you, he wouldn't force you to make a choice right away. Love isn't a race." My words sent Cindy into deep thought. I could see she was wondering if James was really the man she wanted to be with, and this was the opportunity I needed to push my plan one step further. The next day, I received a surprise call from James himself. "We need to talk," he said, his voice strained. I agreed to meet him at a small cafe in town. When I walked into the bar, James was already waiting, his face full of annoyance. "David," he began as soon as I sat down, "we can't go on like this. Cindy needs to make a decision, and I want you to help me make it happen." I kept my face calm, but inside I was laughing at his weakness. "James, I think Cindy needs time. Forcing her will only make things worse." James slammed his hand on the table, drawing the attention of everyone around him. "I gave her enough time, but she keeps coming back to you, like you're her safe haven." I leaned forward, lowering my voice for emphasis. "If you think Cindy sees me as a safe escape, then maybe you need to reconsider your relationship with her." James was silent, his face red with anger. I knew my words had hit a sore spot. He said nothing more, just stood up and left in a huff. After that meeting, I knew the game was slowly turning against me. James, with his temper and insecurity, was digging himself into a hole. Cindy, meanwhile, was increasingly dependent on me for comfort, and I, with all my patience and calculation, was ready for the next step, to bring things to the conclusion I wanted. The tension between Cindy and James came to a head one Saturday evening. I remember Cindy coming to my house looking pale, and her eyes red as if she had been crying all day. She no longer seemed hesitant or confident. Cindy was falling apart, and I knew it. "David," she began, sitting down across from me in the living room. "I don't know what to do. James, he's not the same." I looked at her, my eyes never leaving her tired face. "Cindy, if he makes you suffer like this, are you sure this is what you want?" Cindy shook her head, and for the first time in weeks, I could tell she was completely honest. "I don't know. James wants me to choose him. He said if I stay here, I don't love him enough." "And what do you think?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. I I don't want to lose him, but I can't leave you either," Cindy confessed, her voice shaking. "David, I love you both." This confession no longer hurt as much as the first time. Instead, it felt like I was hearing a self-justification from someone stuck in her own mistakes. Cindy wanted to keep both worlds without hurting either, but she didn't realize that this was impossible. "I understand," I replied, suppressing all emotion to keep my voice calm. "But do you think James really loves you? If he keeps forcing you to choose?" Cindy hesitated, but her eyes told me that the question had affected her deeply. The next week, when it was Cindy's turn to be with James, I got a surprise call from her. Cindy's voice was filled with panic. "David, can you come to James's house right now? We just had a fight, and he left. I don't know where he went." I agreed, not because I was worried about James, but because I knew this was my chance to get into Cindy's mind and assert my position. When I got to James's house, Cindy was sitting on the porch, hugging her shoulders as if trying to hold on to something solid. "What happened?" I asked, stepping closer. "James said he couldn't take it anymore," Cindy replied, her voice breaking. "He said if I didn't choose him now, it would be over between us." I sat down next to Cindy, placing my hand on her shoulder in a comforting gesture. "Cindy, maybe it's time to think about it seriously," I said softly. "If James loved you, he wouldn't force you to choose. He would give you time to make your own decision." Cindy nodded, but I could tell she was still confused. The collapse of her relationship with James was not just a failure of love, but also a failure of the idea she had tried to build, the idea that she could love and keep two men in her life. The next day, I got a text from Cindy. "David, I need to talk to you. Can we meet tonight?" When Cindy came to my house that evening, I was ready for what was to come. She walked in with a face full of guilt and pain. "David," she said, sitting down across from me, "James left. He said he didn't want to go on anymore. I didn't know what to do." I kept quiet, letting Cindy continue. "I was wrong, David. I thought I could keep you both, but it wasn't possible. I know that now, and I want to make it right. I want to be with you again, completely." Her words made me pause for a moment. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but I knew that Cindy's return would not be so simple. She had destroyed too many things, and I could not let her return without paying for her mistakes. "I need time to think, Cindy," I replied, my voice low. "I've been through a lot, and I'm not sure if things will ever go back to the way they were." Cindy nodded, tears falling down her cheeks. "I understand," she said, her voice breaking, "but I will do anything to prove that I still love you." After the night, Cindy admitted she wanted to get back together. I didn't make an immediate decision. I kept my distance for the rest of the week, both to give Cindy time to think and to evaluate my own feelings. My mind was filled with memories, from the first loving days to the bitter moment when Cindy suggested sharing. Cindy called me Friday night, her voice full of pleading. "David, I need to see you now. I can't take this anymore. I need you." I agreed, and she arrived at my house less than 30 minutes later. As soon as she walked in, Cindy sat down on the couch, her hands clasped together in a trembling grip. "David, I lost James, but I don't want to lose you. You're my husband, the one I truly love. I'll do anything to make you forgive me." I sat quietly across from her, letting her continue. Cindy told me about her last weeks with James, the arguments, the pressure he put on her, the exhaustion of balancing two relationships. "I was wrong, David," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was selfish. I thought I could keep both of you, but I couldn't. I know I was only hurting you and myself. Cindy's confession sounded sincere, but I couldn't ignore what she had done. Even though I still loved her, that love had been deeply damaged. I needed to make sure that if we got back together, she would never make the same mistake again. Cindy, I said, my voice low but clear, I'll give you a chance, but I have conditions. Cindy looked up, her eyes filled with hope. Anything, David. I'll do anything. We'll try again, but I need to see that you're willing to sacrifice and prove your love. First, you need to agree to transfer all of our joint assets into my name. This isn't to punish you, but so I can feel assured that you're truly committed. Cindy hesitated, but then she nodded. I agree. Anything. Just come back. I knew that this condition was an important step in protecting myself. Whether Cindy was sincere or not, I needed to take control to avoid any future mishaps. In the following days, Cindy did as she promised. She transferred her assets, including the house and bank accounts, to me. It seemed like she was trying her best to prove that she really wanted to make things right. But what Cindy didn't know was that I decided that the relationship was beyond repair. I couldn't live with someone I didn't trust, and I didn't want to be her backup plan. After everything was done, I invited Cindy to my house one evening for a final talk. She came in with a thin smile, looking relieved that things were getting back on track. Cindy, I began, my voice calm. I want to thank you for doing what I asked. I can see that you tried. I did it because I love you, David, she replied, her eyes filled with hope. But, I continued, looking her straight in the eye, I don't think we can ever go back to the way things were. Cindy froze, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. David, what do you mean? I've done everything to prove my love. Yes, and I appreciate that. But you broke my trust, Cindy. Not just because you love James, but because you thought I could accept sharing you with him. That not only hurt me, but it made me lose respect for you. Tears began to roll down Cindy's cheeks. David, please don't do this. I have nothing left but you. I stood up, keeping my voice calm but firm. Cindy, you had your chance, but I can't stay in a relationship where I constantly wonder if I'm good enough. I've signed the divorce papers. This is what's best for both of us. Cindy burst into tears, but this time I didn't hug her. I let her face the consequences of the choices she had made. A few weeks later, my life began to stabilize. I sold my house and moved into a small apartment near the police station. Cindy left town, and James disappeared from both of our lives completely. There are nights when I still miss the good old days, but I know that I did the right thing. I have taken back control of my life, and despite losing someone who was so important to me, I feel freer and stronger than ever. This story is not only about love and betrayal, but also about finding yourself and your own worth in the most painful situations. And I, in the end, won.